Welcome to the second part of the Shakespeare Codes. In part 1, I discussed and decoded 6 documents, and in part 2, I will discuss and decode a different 6. In this talk, I'm going to unmask William Shakespeare, the actor, and Edward de Vere, the real writer of the Shakespearean works. And the comedy, if you like, of these couple of tricksters who have fooled us for centuries, and the tragedy of Edward de Vere, who was blotted from history by King James I. My contention that the real William Shakespeare, the playwright, as opposed to William Shakespeare, the actor who did exist, is that Edward de Vere, the real man, was destroyed by order of King James I. And the reason for that was de Vere was one of the signatures for the death, the execution of James's mother, Mary Queen of Scots. Revenge is best served cold. A warning now for die-fast Shakespeareans who believe that William Shakespeare, the actor, was the writer of the poetry and sonnets and plays, that he was partly uneducated, he never travelled abroad, never left books in his will, and his daughters were uneducated. Have a look at the true identity of William Shakespeare on another video by me. It is a warning that this may disappoint you, but it is the truth. Again, I've mentioned 2 people earlier who have inspired me. The one was Alexander Orr, and this other one, Dr. James S. Ferris, is the second. He came across a code, secret, Vere, in The Rape of Lucretia, which was the second work of Edward de Vere. Now we come to the second set of proofs about the Shakespeare name. The poem by Christopher Marlowe, which was in The Passionate Pilgrim, and the response to it by Sir Walter Raleigh. The title page by a contemporary writer, Willoughby his Avisa. A poem by Richard Barnfield. A poem by Henry Peacham, and The Warning by Henry Peacham. Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 2, and Sonnet 116, retained for some reason by the scientist Elias Ashmole, who was one of the founders of the Invisible College and the Royal Society. So let's dive into the writing, the codes within it, the decoding, and the proofs we need that Edward de Vere was indeed William Shakespeare, the playwright, as opposed to the actor. I explained about how grids were used in coded messages within Elizabethan times, and in this particular case, part 2, I want to explain the Cardano code, or the Cardano grille. Used together, the Cardano grille and the grids prove the messages that will decode the true identity of William Shakespeare, the playwright. A simple Cardano grille can be shown, it's basically a cutout. It can be shown in this old British passport, where in the cutouts above and below you have a message that this passport is cancelled, and a message which would have been the number of the passport itself. So a very simple thing of a grille on cardboard. Here it's used in Elizabethan times. You have to remember this was the time of the Spanish Armada, the proposed invasion of England. So we have a letter. Sir John regards you well, and speaks again that all as sightly nails him is yours now and ever. May he tone for past delays with many charms. Simple letter, you would read it and be happy with it. But if you put the Cardano grille, the specific grille with the cutouts over that letter, you get Spain sails in May. To arms. A warning to get ready for the invasion. If you wanted a Cardano grille of more durable material, you could cut out one from a piece of copper or some metal foil, or harder cardboard, for instance, instead of fabric or paper. This simple block with Edward de Vere on it is quite easy. When you put the grille over it, you will read Edward de Vere, but that's hard to hide. But what about a little bit of misspelling, a little bit of misdirection? That's much better, and that would work better. How could you use a Cardano grille in these circumstances? Well, you could write about recent plays, recent poetry and sonnets, and you could talk about de Vere having written The Odd Thing, and then you could talk about the playwright William Shakespeare. Put the grille over and you will get that message. De Vere is playwright William Shakespeare. A little bit of misspelling to hide the coding even further. So with that in mind, let's look at the other 6, which I've already explained to you. William Shakespeare, the publisher, in 1599 published this book, The Passionate Pilgrim, supposedly by W. Shakespeare. He was making money on the name. Shakespeare did not allow it, and we'll hear more about it later. But of the 21 poems, 5 are directly attributable to William Shakespeare, and of those that have been identified, there's one by Christopher Marlowe, a response by Walter Raleigh, which we're going to discuss, 2 by Richard Barnfield, whose poetry is worth another look, Thomas Deloney, and Bartholomew Griffin. Live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove. Poem by Christopher Marlowe, probably the most famous poem of his. I'll give you time to read it. It's a very passionate, romantic poem. And hopefully by now you have read it, so let's grid it and see the secret within it. So here's the poem in the grid, and you can see from the arrows it uses the traditional direction of travel of the English language, live with me and be my love, and so on. And within it you can see Vere and you can see de Vere. Not exactly earth-shattering, I know, but what comes after it is. Because here is Sir Walter Raleigh's response, and I know from that response that these 2 guys are having fun. De Vere has been recognised as Shakespeare, his name has been put into a book by William Shakespeare, except it wasn't, and they're having a little bit of fun playing with the name and identifying in code that de Vere was William Shakespeare. If that the world and love were young, and truth in every shepherd's tongue, these pretty pleasures might me move to live with thee and be thy love. So this turns out to be a grid of 9 by 13 or 13 by 9, and again in part 1 I explained how there are 32 ways to put a grid of a certain number of letters together. And what do we get here? We get de Vere, D and Vere. So Dr. D is coming into the equation again. But what if I look at the other way of putting the grid together? Here we have a truly eureka moment. As you can see, the direction of travel is the same, but we get Vere across the word truth. The de Vere motto was nothing truer than truth. And we have de Vere again and Vere again. Surely concrete evidence that Marlowe's poem wasn't just a coincidence because of this response by Raleigh. These 2 guys knew the truth. In 1594, not long after Venus and Adonis and the rape of Lucretia, we have this, Willoughby his Avisa. And if you read the whole of that title, Willoughby his Avisa, or the true picture of a model maid and a chaste and constant wife, and so on, all the way down to the date. And look around at the illustrations. You seem to have 2 nymphs or cherubs above pointing, Are they pointing to that deer's head, or are they pointing further down? The soldier on the left appears to be pointing straight across. Let's make a line on all those 3 points. And again we can see hares or leverets on the drawing down at the bottom left and right. And in the middle cartouche, there seems to be a mythical monster of sorts, a man with the head of a deer. Let's explore some more. If you looked very carefully at the illustrations around, you would have seen that the fingers of 2 of the nymphs and a statue point, and they seem to point and enclose the word will, as in William Shakespeare. Down at the bottom, right and left, you can see 2 hares or leverets, young hares. And in the attempt to speak, hares speak is an anagram of Shakespeare. And then in that middle motif, you have a strange creature, a man with the head of a deer, a mythical person. To go off track a little from this, let's read The Labouring Man, which was an early poem by de Vere. Who worketh most to their share least doth fall, with due desert reward will never be. The swiftest hare, and that word is a term in those days for a secret, unto the mastiff slow, oft times doth fall to him as for a prey. The greyhound thereby doth miss his game we know, for which he made such speedy haste away. So he that takes the pain to pen the book reaps not the gifts of goodly golden muse, but those who gain that who on the work shall look, and from the sour the sweet by skill doth choose, and so on. Now there are intimations here of the poor poet ape of Ben Jonson, or the upstart crow of Robert Greene, somebody who is plagiarizing work, who is taking the best, who is gathering the low-hanging fruit and making it splendid, as we all know from the works of Shakespeare. And the other important symbol here is the man with the head of a deer, because the de Vere title had many deer parks. He was in possession of many deer parks throughout the country. And the creature is called a Cali greyhound, half deer. And indeed, the nymphs at the top seem to be also pointing through the head of the deer. I accept, by the way, that the classic symbol on the heraldic shield of the de Veres was a star, but the Cali greyhound was an earlier symbol used on the heraldic shield of the de Veres. And the interesting thing here as well, and I have to credit here Charles Bird, he gave a presentation at Castle Hedingham, which was the old manor of Edward de Vere, in the de Vere Society in September 2015. You might want to look that up on the internet. And he showed that the colon on the catalogue page of the first folio, the first collection of the known works by William Shakespeare, has got on it the Cali greyhound and also the speaking hare. As you remember, hares speak is the symbolic term for Shakespeare. It's an anagram. Interesting. Well, if you'll excuse me for a minute, the stag, the deer, led me in a completely different direction, which I would at least like you to contemplate. This painting, which is at Hampton Court, near the River Thames and near London, is supposedly of Elizabeth I. It's entitled The Unknown Lady in a Persian Dress. And it's Elizabeth I, supposedly pregnant. In the small oval cartouche at the bottom is this poem, which I'll give you time to read. But she's patting the head of a deer. She's in front of a chestnut tree, and as you know, roast chestnuts are beautiful. She's very sad, and in this poem, the third line from the bottom, beginning, it says, "The shales or shells be mine, the kernels others are, the delicious nut inside. My music may be plaintive, my physique tears, if this be all the fruit my love tree bears." This seems to be a woman a queen at that, who's lost something, and that something seems to be a child, a baby. And with the stag, is there a link here to Edward de Vere? Another part of history that needs to be dug deeper at. Back to the book, Willoughby his Avisa. We have WS appears to be a familiar of Avisa within the writing. Shakespeare's mentioned. HW is mentioned. Is this Henry Rosalie, the young youth of the sonnets? Avisa parallels Elizabeth I because her motto, Semper Eadem, always the same, is the same, Avisa and Elizabeth I. So this seems to be about Elizabeth I, and it seems to be about Edward de Vere, who raged about the book, and it was indeed banned for a time. The other interesting thing is the author, the supposed author, Henry Willoughby, and the discoverer of the poetry, the book, Hadrian Dorel, don't appear to exist. So this was written by anonymous people, and they probably had to keep it anonymous because they were directing a secret which involved aristocracy at the very highest level. Here, putting the grid together, it's a 13 by 24 grid, and we're going downwards now. Direction of travel is not the normal way to write in the English language. So you can see Willoughby his Avisa in column 1, and then down the bottom we move up from 124 to 2:1. And we come out with D, de Vere, EO, the Earl of Oxford, and Crow. Now Crow is very important because again, upstart Crow that Robert Greene spoke about, the upstart Crow who plagiarized and took work and put it down in his own name. So that is a clear direction that the grid is correct. For this next example of a decode, we're looking at the work of Richard Barnfield. Now, you may remember Barnfield has 2 poems in The Passionate Pilgrim. They're probably worth looking at. I don't have the time to look at all the works, all the plays, all the sonnets of Shakespeare, but you collectively do. And Shakespeare then, whose honey flowing vein, pleasing the world, they praise doth obtain, whose Venus and whose Lucretia sweet and chaste, thy name in fame's immortal book have placed. Live ever thou, at least in fame live ever. Well may the body die, but fame dies never. So we've got 215 letters in that poem, and they can create a grid of 5 by 43, or indeed 43 by 5, but that would be a little bit unmanageable. You can see here the direction of travel by the arrows is down and down. And I put in red the words Shakespeare is de Vere. Pretty obvious message there from Richard Barnfield. Now we can look at Henry Peacham's book, Minerva Britannia, 1612, so after the death of both de Vere and Dee. Minerva, as I've mentioned, the Roman goddess who was Pallas Athene, the spear shaker. So there in the title itself is a clue to Shakespeare. And on the title page you can see an arm coming out with a quill pen writing a motto in Latin. You can put that motto together, grid it yourself, and see the name de Vere, the hidden actor behind the screen, behind the theatre screen. And in the introduction to these 200 odd illustrations and poems by Henry Peacham, he makes this point, and the clear bit I want to talk about is in red. With outward eye first view and mark this book. Variety of objects much will please. With inward eye then on the matter look. Foresee the author's care and little ease, t'invent, t'imprint, and publish for delight, and for reward but craves your good insight. He's asking you to look inside the words and letters. He's asking you to find the codes within his books. This admonition at the introduction of his book by Henry Peacham can be put into a grid of 19 by 11, and we very clearly see within that grid Edward de Vere. And I'll just do one example of the three that I did mention in part one. I picked this because again you can see theatre masks. You can see in the centre left the mask of a boar, and the blue boar was the symbol also of the de Vere family. There's also a boar on the bottom of the three masks. So the bottom part, the bottom section of this writing, which starts a broad religion, you can see it's again the direction of travel is the way of normal English writing, as opposed to the one I showed in the earlier slide, which went forward and then backwards. And we come out with de Vere and Vere. So not just the beginning, not just the admonition within the introduction, not just this example, but at least two others, and possibly more, all naming Edward de Vere as Shakespeare. Now we come to Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 2. The life of Hamlet seems to reflect in part the life of Edward de Vere. De Vere was taken by pirates. De Vere became a ward of court under Cecil, and there are other parallels. So in a way, with Hamlet, de Vere was writing about himself. And this is the final part of Hamlet when he asks his friend Horatio to give him a cup of poison because he'd been in a duel, and again there was a duel in the life of Edward de Vere, which lamed him. As thou art a man, give me the cup. Let go, by heaven, I'll have it. O God, Horatio, what a wounded name. Think standing thus unknown shall live behind me. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. Now this is a classic combination of the Cardano grille and a gridded document to give us the answers that we need. And here we have them in a 14 by 16 grille. Vere, name unknown, shall live behind me. Me, Vere, Iwa, draw thy breath to tell my story. This is a dying Hamlet in one of the final plays of Shakespeare saying, do not forget me. Well, I certainly won't, Edward de Vere. Only last year in 2025, found in the possessions of one Elias Ashmole, who was one of the founding members of the Invisible College and indeed the Royal Society, so a very important individual, a polymath himself, a scientist, was this particular sonnet, number 116. It might even be in the handwriting of Edward de Vere. I'll give you time to read the sonnet, and then we're going to grid it and see what the secret message within it is. Let's now grid sonnet 116. It's 450 letters, which is a 15 by 30 or 30 by 15 grid. And this time I'm going to show both of them. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out, even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. You can see the direction of travel of this particular sonnet, and lo and behold, we have de Vere, Tempest, Blue Ball, Oxenford, Earl of Oxford, Bolbec, that was another title of de Vere. And I know I've got this right because underneath Rosy Lips, as you can see, we have Kiss. Kiss, Rosy Lips together in juxtaposition tell me this is correct. And we also have Star, the symbol of de Vere, and it's next to Shakes, and down below you can see scene. So we have the word Shake Scene. Again, we are into the work of Robert Greene with the Upstart Crow. The combination of all these together, come on, this is a real code. And it identifies de Vere as Hamlet and as William Shakespeare. And if we look at the grid another way, 30 by 15 grid, we get Vere, Ed, Ever, or Vere, Shake. Tempest, unknown, is his alter, and then ego, an anagram of geo, Vere again, never writ. So you've got that Shakespeare is the alter ego of Edward de Vere. William Shakespeare, the actor, never wrote the plays. This illustration is the illustration representing the Invisible College, and you might note there are men on the tower near the dome waving large quills. The combination of the pen is mightier than the sword. You can also see what seems to be an actor falling from a cliff, the middle right there, and you can see somebody being drawn out of a well. That hat is reminiscent not only of James I, but also of Sir Francis Bacon. So there's a story here, if we can only work out what it is. And the other interesting thing I wanted to say, a connection with Elias Ashmole, who kept secret to himself, sonnet 116, is if you look top left, and you can see the constellation of Ophiuchus, or indeed it could be Hercules, wrapped round by a snake, the date 1604, the very date of Edward de Vere's death. So is this the secret that the Invisible College is holding, and that later on Elias Ashmole held in the actual physical paper of sonnet 116? So here we have a secret, or a number of secrets, that have been lost to history, refound by Elias Ashmole, refound in a way by John Thomas Looney, and messed around with over the last century. And I'm sure from my presentations that I've done on this in the past that there are many questions. I've tried to answer some of the more fundamental ones that people ask me. And here's a couple more for you to ponder on. So here's a challenge to you. Here's sonnet 76, the original. Now, you can see two V's instead of a W. Was that meant to put V's in place so you could find Vere in the code? You'll notice in the actual script, the V's are put down as V's and the W's are put down as W's. So have a look at it, count the number of letters, see if it's griddable, work out a manageable grid. What about the U instead of a V? Should they be V's? Play around, see what you can come up with. Add to the fire. And yes, one of the questions would be the frequency of the English language, because D has two E's in it, and Vere and de Vere have 2 or 3 E's in, the most common letter in the English language. And if we look at the letter D and the letter R, you can see the average there is 5% usage of letters, so 1 in 20 letters. So it is easy to say that, yeah, it's going to happen that D and de Vere are going to come up. But the V is less than 1%. So that is pause for thought. So yes, against my contentions and my grids is this fact that E is the most common letter in the English language, and we have 2 E's in Vere, 3 in de Vere, and 2 in D of Dr. John Dee. So yes, it is point, but I try and make a counterpoint to that, as you heard earlier. What about the facts for? Well, again, we have a V and another V instead of W. Was that a point to get Vere into the coding? We have TT in the corner to show you that the grid is the correct grid. We have crow in more than one of the decodes, and again I link the upstart crow of Shakespeare in the writing of Robert Greene. We have ape at the bottom of one of the decodes, again a fact to get the grid correct. And in the way of saying it, poor poet, poor poet, poor poet ape in the same grid. We have kiss against rosy lips to tell you exactly by their juxtaposition that you've got the grid correct. And in that same grid we have Oxenford, the Earl of Oxford, we have Bolbec, one of his other titles, we have Roublaw, we have Shakespeare, we have Shakespeare crossing with de Vere, and we have the colon of Leveret, which links the first folio to Willoughby is a visa. And there are others, but I think you can see that my counterpoint is extremely strong. Take a saying now from Goldfinger by Ian Fleming. Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is enemy action. Well, in parts 1 and parts 2 of the Shakespeare codes, I've given you 12. And there are lots more to find, and I'm hoping that you will help me find them. Finally, the Shakespearean mask is cracking. It's slipping away, and the truth is being found. The secret is out. Shakespeare, the playwright, the writer of the poetry and the sonnets, was Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. The bust is busted. The most commonly seen face of William Shakespeare is indeed William Shakespeare, the actor. But was he the poor poet ape? Or indeed, partly because of plagiarism, was Edward de Vere the poet ape? These contemporaries of Shakespeare, I have de Vere down on the bottom right there, knew the secret and encoded the secret in their grids. Dr. John Dee, Ben Jonson, Bishop Joseph Hall, Sir Walter Raleigh, Christopher Marlowe, Elias Ashmole, who kept sonnet 116, Richard Barnfield, the poet who has more than one poet in the Passion Pilgrim. They all knew the secret. And finally, of course, Robert Greene, the writer of The Upstart Crow. Looking at the chronology of this story, we first have Robert Greene in Groat's Worth of Wit, 1592, writing about the upstart crow, the shake scene, the person who's coming along, plagiarizing the works of others, shining it up and presenting it under his own name. Venus and Adonis and the rape of Lucretia afterwards. And then the 4 books or documents, Willoughby his Avisa, The Passionate Pilgrim with the works of Marlowe and Raleigh in it, Richard Barnfield's poem Virgidinarum of Bishop Hall, Joseph Hall. Then the death of de Vere. The sonnets were published just afterwards, and then the death of John Dee. And John Dee probably helped code documents for 6 years after the death of de Vere, and indeed helped getting the plays out beyond the death of de Vere. After that, when both men were dead, We had Peacham's Minerva Britannia, we had Ben Jonson's On Poor Poet Ape, and also his writing in the First Folio, which came out in 1623. So the secret was there, but it was always bubbling just under the surface, and many people wrote about it, but they wrote at a time of danger, a time when kings and queens had ultimate power. So it was hidden until now. And so, approaching the end now, I have to say a couple of tenets that I live by. The first by the famous scientist Albert Einstein. Blind belief in authority is the greatest enemy of truth. And the second by Arthur Schopenhauer. All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as self-evident. I hope that will come true for Edward de Vere. So I've completed the 12 combined grids and proofs as far as I'm concerned in parts 1 and parts 2 that to me prove that Edward de Vere was the face and the force behind the Shakespeare works. I believe Edward de Vere should be given his rightful place as one of the greatest Englishmen of our times. It doesn't demean either Edward de Vere or William Shakespeare to make these statements, and it doesn't belittle the magnificent opus of work that has enriched the English language and given joy and pleasure to audiences worldwide, and still does. So again, two things for you, the listener. Please go on the internet, sign the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt, at least that this work has shown you there is reasonable doubt about William Shakespeare the actor having been the poet, the writer of the sonnets, the writer of the plays. And finally, as I've given you with Sonnet 76, go out yourselves, find other examples, and make the proof of this truth overwhelming. The truth was a mirror in the hands of God. It fell and broke in many pieces. Everybody took a piece of it, and they looked at it and thought that they had the truth. The De Vere motto, nothing is truer than truth. It's time now for our two tricksters to take a bow. William Shakespeare, actor of Stratford-on-Avon. Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is ended with a sleep.